So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to Nathan's colleague and my colleague at the Innovation Lab, Sarah Barker. Sarah is our community's Innovation Director, heading up a team of data scientists, including Nathan and Paola, who are working to help grant makers and not-for-profit organisations make the most of the data that you're all collecting. Sarah has extensive experience in consulting, systems architecture, training and management, working mainly on large-scale IT system replacements. Before joining Smarty Grants, Sarah spent 2 years working for an international NGO in London, first in its IT department and then as coordinator of a multi-million-dollar livelihood project funded through a corporate grant. So it just shows a lot of the people that work in Smarty Grants have a bit of a not-for-profit head and then a bit of a technical head as well. Sarah's particularly interested in poverty reduction, tech for development and women's rights and empowerment. Sarah's unofficial title at our community is Director of Solving Really Hard Things that the rest of us don't know how to tackle. It's a bit of a handful, so we call her the Innovation Director instead. She's got a really giant brain and we're really lucky to have it at this point in time trained squarely on grant making. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Kathy. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the edge of Naarm, here at our community house in North Melbourne. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm Sarah Barker and I'm the Director of our community's Innovation Lab. It's great to be here speaking at Grant Making Intelligence. And here at our community, we think a lot about intelligent grant making. Where you can see there's a lot of opportunity to use data-driven smarts to help make your grant making easier and more effective. And we're investing in this area to research and develop new tools to turn these ideas into reality. I'll talk a little bit about artificial intelligence before we're walking through some practical examples of how these data-driven smarts might work. I was a little bit worried you might be a bit overloaded with data after Nathan's talk, but there were so many comments and questions and interest coming in through the chat. It seems that you are very interested in data, which is great to see. Okay, so what is artificial intelligence and how can it be applied to grant making? So bots like this have come a long way, and this one's super cute. But it's a while away from being a useful addition to your grant-making team. It's pretty good on a bike, and it seems friendly, but it's not so great at getting your grant guidelines out by the deadline or getting your funding distribution report ready for review. Perhaps one day, automated assistance in these areas will be possible. By the way, the footage of this robot is coming up to 10 years old at the end of this year. And while there's still a lot of investment in humanoid robots, other types of AI are much more mainstream. So, for example, Siri and Alexa that you're probably familiar with, driverless vehicles, and robotic devices that are used in manufacturing. I have a robot vacuum called Bob, and he makes my life a lot easier. So, artificial intelligence, or AI, is defined most simply as enabling machines to think like humans and mimic human behaviour. I like to think about this in two ways. One is you can ask AI a question and it'll give you a reasonable answer. Or you can ask artificial intelligence to perform a task for you and it can do a reasonable job of performing that task. This artificial intelligence can take the form of physical robots, or they can be smart programs, or algorithms, as Nathan mentioned, or models. They can take an input and come back to you with an answer, or process information, or carry out a series of operations. So, is AI something we can use today in grant making? Unfortunately not really, not yet. What we're finding is that there's a lot of investment happening in AI in the private sector, to a lesser extent the public sector, and frankly not really in grant making. The social sector is quite a way behind. However, there are some opportunities to learn from tools and techniques being applied in banking, insurance, recruitment and other industries that can inform grant making and social sector applications of AI. So now we have an understanding of artificial intelligence, let's cast the net a bit wider to the broader topic of data science. This is a set of tools and techniques that are used to design and enable AI capabilities. So this broader field involves a lot of disciplines. It involves being able to address common challenges in working with data, such as processing data at scale or cleaning up messy data, something that Paola and Nathan know a lot about, and most importantly, getting value out of data. And what excites us is that while this field of data science is needed in order to design and enable AI tools, these data science tools and techniques are useful in their own right. You can get a lot of value out of data through analysis, statistics, and programming, and using the data to inform your team. So I invite you to reflect on the data capability you have already. We've been doing a lot of work over the last 2 years to help not-for-profit organisations use data more effectively and responsibly. This is a framework we use to help organisations make sense of their data capabilities and what's possible with data. So let's walk through it in the context of grant making. Consider how you collect and store data. What data are you capturing? What systems are you using? Is that data good quality? Is it secure? And how are you managing privacy, even if Dennis thinks it's bullshit? Then you need to be able to process and explore the data. The data is used to power your grants administration, reflected in your grants applications, helping you manage your workflow, checking in on decision and payment statuses, and so on. Then you need to be able to process and explore the data. The data is used to create visualizations, such as management reports to show the distribution of your funding, or operational reports to help you monitor your programs and your progress. And I'll be speaking a bit tomorrow on reporting in Smarty Grants. And you can go beyond that. This is often where data science kicks in. This is where you really start crunching the data to see what value you can get out of it. You can learn from the data or predict what could or should happen next. I often call this the Asians, because there's lots of opportunities for optimization, automation, personalization, and recommendations. The point of all of this is having these additional capabilities presents some opportunities. We think data science can help you and your grantees become more efficient. This is so that more of the money can go towards creating social change rather than the overheads of actually managing or applying for grants. It can make you more effective. This is where Dennis brought in the concept of being more outcomes driven. This means developing a really deep understanding about where the money is needed and making sure that money is actually flowing into the areas that need it the most. You can be more data driven, so it's data enabled. This means it's based on evidence rather than a hunch. And it also unlocks the capabilities to do things faster, smarter, and better. But it still needs to be human-centred. We need people involved in every step of the way to make sure that the granting process is well executed and it's fair. There's no point crunching data or building data tools if you don't think about the people that are going to be using those tools. We're trying to equip people both in funders and in not-for-profits to make better decisions. The goal is not to build a robot, give it all our money, and then have the robot decide where that money's going to go. That's not really what we're working towards. So at the end of the day, the idea of grants AI is a buzzword, but we're really more interested in grants intelligence. We could even have a whole conference about it. And it will take a lot of hard work to build this data-driven grants ecosystem. Some of it will be on a project basis that you drive forward as a grant maker, or your grantees do more with their data. Some of it will be enabled through data sharing, and some of it will be enabled through systems and infrastructure that help support the grants ecosystem. And you might have already identified some ideas. Without this ongoing effort to learn, improve, and optimise, there's a chance that money's being spent on things that just aren't that important. If we can make grants more intelligent, this is a great result for you as the grant maker, the not-for-profits you're funding, and any data practitioners that have gotten involved and the communities that you're serving. Okay, so the first area where data science can really help is in needs analysis. You can think of this as, hey robot, who needs our funding and why? This is where an organisation might use external data sets like demographic data or unemployment figures or information about migration or data relating to existing community services. This is where an organisation can crunch this data and help build up a picture of where there are opportunities to serve the community. This is also an area that's most likely to involve big data sets. We find that the internal data sets of grant makers and not-for-profits is actually relatively quite small compared to data sets found in corporates or in government beyond the scope of grant making. This can help you answer questions like, which target groups need this money the most? What are the needs of these target groups? And this type of analysis falls into the category of helping you become more effective in your grant making. The analysis could be performed in partnership with a grant maker, yourselves, and a data scientist. And as Kathy mentioned, bringing together that subject matter expertise and that data capability is really powerful stuff. And actually, both funders and not-for-profits are ultimately trying to serve communities. Not-for-profits might use needs analysis to answer questions like, which target groups need our services the most? What types of programs and services would best suit these people? So there's an opportunity here for collaboration and co-design. If you're offering fewer, larger, more strategic grants to a small number of organisations, you often have strong relationships and partnerships formed around the granting process. So there's an opportunity there to work jointly on a needs analysis project rather than you doing needs analysis and then your grantees doing that work separately, often under resource and cost constraints. Analysis tools here might include statistical analysis, modelling and mapping. There's also a number of tools on the market to help with this type of analysis and that include ready access to public data sets and prepared reports. So a real-world example of a needs analysis is the Datathon that we ran last year in partnership with Community Hubs Australia. They run a program for new migrant families and their kids, providing access to playgroups, school readiness programs, English language training, social activities like cooking classes, and referrals to other family and health services. In the Datathon, teams of data scientists used Australian census data and other social data sets to provide recommendations for where to open new hubs. The result of these types of analyses is that grant makers can design your programs, guidelines and eligibility criteria against information that's been informed by community needs. And the organisations you're funding can be really clear about the need they're trying to address when they're applying for grants. Grant makers often tell us that you're resource constrained. You're often working in small teams and that there's a lot of manual work that goes into administering your grant programs. So there's opportunities to automate some of these tasks for you. So here you might say, hey, robot, can you do this for me? Grants automation can help with the questions, do these applicants meet the eligibility criteria? Has this applicant already applied for this round of funding? How can I easily surface applications related to a specific subject area? How can I easily surface applications that are targeting a specific group? Eligibility checks, duplicate checks, keyword matching, grants classification, and automated workflow are just a few examples of grants automation, and there are many others. The aim is to help you become more efficient. So we saw a bit of this morning. Our community has made a significant investment in automated classification tools. Paola, our principal data scientist, who leads our data science work for Smarty Grants, has built a tool that can take an application as input and return the relevant subjects like arts, sports, community development and so on, and beneficiary groups such as females or children and youth. And you've seen some of the analysis that Nathan has subsequently done to crunch this data in aggregate. Paola is also in the process of extending this tool to auto-classify grants against the Sustainable Development Goals. Soon, grant makers using Smarty Grants will be able to auto-classify inbound grants and also historical grants. Paola's work relies heavily on a technique called natural language processing, which is also relied on for tools like Siri and Alexa. Processing text such as grant applications, case notes, or survey responses is another area where you often find larger data sets in the social sector. Helping you find and fund grants faster can really be really powerful in fast response grants. So we saw this twice in 2020, first with the bushfires and then with the COVID pandemic. A lot of grant programs were launched quickly, and there was a push to get funding out the door as quickly as possible. Being able to auto-classify or label grants, dig out the time-critical ones, confirm their eligibility, and give them priority for assessment can help get money out the door quicker. So we're really interested to know whether our auto-classifier is useful for that. If not, why not, how we can improve it. There are also opportunities to automate parts of the grants assessment process. We started this research a couple of years ago to see if we can build a model that can assess and shortlist grants. This could be framed as, hey, robot, which applications should I approve? And this is one area we say proceed with caution. This type of tool could answer questions like, should we approve this application? Or taking a portfolio view, if we specify our preferred distribution of grant funding or our risk appetite, which application should we approve? A couple of years ago, we partnered with a grant maker to analyse the grants in one of their large grant rounds. It's actually difficult to find enough data to build a robot assessor, as each round generally has unique assessment criteria and typically doesn't cover all the types of grants for various subject and beneficiary groups. And we realised that as part of this process that machines really shouldn't be making these decisions, not without supervision. Imagine there's a particular need in the community, and for whatever reason, grants targeted at that need have not been approved in the past. So the machine could learn that behaviour and learn that bias and continually exclude those grants for those niche areas, even if they're worthy applications. So we need to be very careful in building these systems. Our research continues in this area. This morning, Adrian raised a question on the chat about the New Zealand Ethical AI Charter. That's something that we're feeding into our work. And Paola has also reached out to the people working on sort of AI ethical standards in Australia and is going to be joining some of their working groups. We firmly believe that a human needs to be involved when determining which grants are funded. However, data-driven tools can help. So now we're looking at developing alternative tools such as tools that can help you detect bias in your decisions, tools that can optimise results based on your criteria that you specify and the scores that your assessors have already inputted against your applications. Another area we'd love to progress is to be able to provide better feedback for your grantees, either while they're writing their applications or after the assessment process to give insights as to why their grant was unsuccessful. So we often talk about a tool that grant seekers could use to give an indication of their likelihood of approval based on their draft application content and other factors that Nathan went through this morning, such as approval rates for the related grant maker type, subject area, and population group. And I've kicked over my glass of water. It's okay, not quite near the PowerPoint. Thank you, Dennis. Bit of activity here at OC Health Central. Cool. So once you've done all the hard work of awarding the funds, your grantees can get on with the hard work of delivering their programs and services. Then there's the focus on how the dollars translated into impact. This is like asking, hey, robot, are we achieving our outcome goals? This type of analysis can answer questions like, what change did we create? Was it good value for money? What worked and what didn't? And what can we learn? As well as dollars translating into impact, impact can translate into dollars. More and more of you as grant makers are asking not-for-profits to demonstrate their impact when applying for your funding. So an example of where we've been involved in impact analysis is in a project that we worked on with Taskforce Community Agency. We analysed their client and case management data for their alcohol and other drugs programs. And Nathan, who you heard from earlier, and who leads our work with not-for-profits, worked with Taskforce to visualise their client base by demographics, drug of choice, and referral pathway. From the analysis, you can see the impact that COVID had on their youth program, where the number of contacts by telephone increased dramatically in March 2020 as COVID hit. This resulted in Taskforce successfully applying for grant funding to launch a new telehealth program. Nathan also analysed client-reported outcomes, providing some evidence to suggest that Taskforce programs achieve a positive outcome on average for its clients. Then Nathan's analysis went a step further and broke down the outcomes data by gender. You can see here that the data seems to suggest that either men and women report differently when asked these outcomes questions, or the programs may not be achieving comparable outcomes for men and women. As well as being valuable insights for the not-for-profit and the clients they serve, we know these types of analyses are seen really favourable by you as grant makers. We know you don't often get that level of visibility as to what's happening on the ground. And gaining access to these insights can help inform decisions about where your money should be spent in future. The full report for Taskforce is available on their website. They were quite bold in publishing that in full if you're interested in taking a look. On the topic of impact measurement, we're seeing an increased interest from grant makers in becoming more outcomes focused and to measure your impact. You might have heard that we've built some tools in Smarty Grants to capture outcomes and metrics and standardised collection across grantees so that results can be rolled up. If you're joining the Smarty Grant sessions tomorrow, you'll hear more about the outcomes engine then from Kathy. As well as working for our community, I'm on the national board of SIMNA, which is the Social Impact Measurement Network of Australia. And we're keen to encourage funders to sign up as members. And SIMNA membership provides you opportunities to bring knowledge sharing and learning about social impact measurement into your teams. We also hold the annual SIMNA Awards to highlight best practice examples of social impact measurement across Australia. And for the last 2 years, our community has sponsored the Effective Investment in Social Impact Measurement Award. So look that up and put yourselves forward if you're measuring your own social impact as a funder or you're actively supporting your grantees to measure the impact of their work. At the moment, analysis and reporting that occurs for grant management or not-for-profit programs and impact evaluation are often point in time. This means that each time you're looking for answers or evidence, there's a lot of effort for you or your grantees to source and repurpose previous reports, particularly if the data analyst has since left. It would be nice to be able to ask whenever you like, "Hey robot, how are we tracking?" So another area where data science can help is to standardise your data collection and implement tools to ensure sustainable real-time monitoring. That way, the data is always on hand when it's needed. Real-time monitoring provides feedback earlier, so you have a greater ability to respond and adjust. And there was a question posed this morning by Janice about reporting in Smarty Grants, and I'll be talking about that in tomorrow's session. For not-for-profits, implementing real-time monitoring and streamlined reporting can help build confidence and trust in their relationships with you, which means you'll be more likely to fund them again. For example, always having impact data on hand when applying for grants. In addition to streamlined data collection and reporting, there's a lot of work being done in the social sector to consider issues like privacy, security, support, and maintenance. So a key issue in this area is that grant makers and not-for-profits need to find the time and money to set up these types of systems. So it's worth considering if you have money set aside for capacity building in your own organisation or in your grantees to invest in this, building up this data capability and these systems. Over the past 2 years, we've matched a few volunteer data practitioners with not-for-profits, and we hope to expand on those efforts this year. You may need to pay for them if you're not a not-for-profit. Okay, so the final area I'll mention where data science can help with grants is across the grants ecosystem, matching grant makers and not-for-profits who have an alignment in the outcomes they're trying to achieve. This is where grant makers might ask, "Hey robot, who are the organisations we should be funding?" Or for not-for-profits to ask, "Hey robot, where are the grants that fund this type of work?" This is not too dissimilar to other recommendation or matching algorithms that are used in online dating services or on Netflix. Netflix monitors your preferences and watching behaviour, and at the end of each movie or episode suggests titles you might like. So in a very similar way, recommendations can be used to match funders who have funds for particular subjects and target beneficiaries, or who want to achieve particular outcomes with not-for-profits or service providers that are working in that space and addressing the same need. To enable this type of matching, you ideally need some standard metadata. So again, this is where our classy taxonomy or Paola's auto classification algorithm can help. And we can be running that over systems like Funding Centre to capture the grant seeker view. We are really keen to build features in Smarty Grants and Funding Centre to help you, the grant makers, and the not-for-profits that are applying for you find each other more easily. So let's envision a world where all of this is in place. You and your grantees use data as an asset, and you're equipped with tools and skills to use the data that you have to do your work more efficiently and effectively. Grant makers and not-for-profits have a deep understanding of the needs of the community. Grant makers and not-for-profits who are trying to meet a similar demand can find each other easily. There is a line of sight between the needs of the community, to the dollars, to the programs and services, to the impact. Then there's opportunities to learn what works and what can be done better. And this data feeds back into the planning cycle for the next funding cycle. So today I've gone through ways to make the grants process more intelligent by building up our data capability. We've covered how data science can help with needs analysis, grants automation, grants assessment, impact analysis, real-time monitoring and streamlined reporting, and grant matching. These are just some areas of opportunities, but it's by no means an exhaustive list. You may have identified other areas we haven't talked about today when thinking through the grants process and how data science or AI could be applied. If you have any ideas, we welcome you to reach out and chat to us. And why does all this matter? Well, you really want to know that the dollars that you're sending out the door are going to the areas that need it the most. And not-for-profits really want to make sure that they're delivering relevant and effective programs and services, they're telling their story effectively, and they're attractive to you, the grant maker. Ultimately, we're trying to make grants more intelligent by ensuring that more money is going to where it's needed the most. And it's a team effort. This work requires you as grant makers, not-for-profits, data scientists, engineers, project managers, and others to build up this capability. It's a big investment and something that we're actively working on in our community and in our Innovation Lab, Smarty Grants and Funding Centre teams. If you're interested in knowing more about the work we're doing with data science in our community, please visit our website at ourcommunity.com.au/innovationlab. And when you're on the website, there's a link to sign up to our mailing list. So please do that if you're interested in updates. And thank you for your time today. I hope it was useful. And I think we go to questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. We need that applause soundtrack. There we go. Just for the purposes of those of you at home, there's about 3 people making that applause, as well as the sound and the visual guide. We've got some questions coming through, Sarah. Very practical questions, actually, which is good. Nicole asks, we try to use the validation and question design functions in Smarty Grants to help people self-identify their likely eligibility. Would like to see if auto classification could assist with this.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because some of that comes down to form design. Looking at ways to add validation so that there's a message saying, you know, you haven't selected a certain response to a certain question. Are you sure that you're eligible or not? In terms of application of more data science and AI, I think it comes down to how nuanced the guidelines and eligibility criteria are. If it's a very clear rule, such as they need to have certain DGR status or so on, there's one way to implement that, which is to bring those data sets together and do those checks. If it's more nuanced than that, then obviously that requires, if you think about the process that you as a human goes through to check that eligibility, then obviously there's a more nuanced tool that needs to be developed. And that means it's by nature probabilistic. So it means that you have higher potential for errors, false positives, false negatives, and you'd need to think about how you implement that and how you put, human controls around that.
So next question is actually quite similar, and you may have covered this as well. I'm interested in an assessment tool for basic eligibility grants, the small, simple ones without relative assessment criteria. And the reason I'm reading this as well is sometimes I feel like we can see where the need is by the places people go first for their queries about this stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of music to my ears, actually, because that's where we've landed on too in terms of a key area of focus over the next 2 years. We really had really big ambitions to be able to predict whether or not an application should be approved and declined and help you with that hardcore assessment. What we're finding, though, is we need to pare that right back and start with those basic eligibility checks and look at ways that we can help automate those. And that might involve some data science, but also some tweaks to Smarty Grants in terms of how that's managed, and also some sort of pre-canned reports or things that you can use for eligibility checks, duplicate checks, and so on. So we really want to work with a few grant makers over the next couple of years to review how those processes work, and really try and sort of knock the rough edges off and automate where we can.
So that's a good point, Sarah. So don't sit there and wait for these tools to come to you. You can do that. But if you are interested in this stuff and you'd like to help shape what we do first and next, get in touch, because we do listen, and we're always interested if you've got a data set that we can work with, and we can provide some insights back to you, but also feed the general knowledge.
Yeah, I will actually extend on that point, Kathy. I mean, we need you as much as you need us in that sense, because often we do need to hone in on one grant maker data set, and we only ever do that in partnership with a grant maker. So we are very interested in and working with grant makers, and it gives us a lot more flex in terms of really interrogating that data and working out what works.
Got a question here from Marissa, who asks, is there the ability to look at being able to use national data sets to feed into assessment tools in Smarty Grants, similar to the ABN data that's already being able to be pulled in? For example, being able to overlay ABS data, AEDC data into our assessment forms.
Yes, so it's something that we've looked at quite a lot. I think there's still some question marks on how we implement that. Do we build into Smarty Grants? Do we integrate to other systems? There's sort of some more questions around implementation, but we know that would be a really good thing to do.
I'm going to finish with one question from me, actually, because I think it's important to raise. You mentioned Task Force published their report, and you said that it was quite bold. In your experience, are people willing to share the things that they find in data science? How does that play out?
Yeah, so the organisations we've worked with so far have been much more open than I expected. We, a couple of years ago, really reached out and said, look, we're trying to build up some capability through the sector. The only way we do that is working with and through organisations. So we go into a lot of these conversations saying that there needs to be space to learn in private. Any of their data or any of the insights that are derived from that data is private to them. But what we're interested in is, what are the key lessons and processes and tools and templates and things that we can derive from that then can be disseminated more broadly. Task Force certainly took that a step further and just published the whole report in its entirety. I did think that was bold, and I did think it's really commendable as well. To give you a bit of a sense, that report was about 20 days worth of Nathan's effort, a bit of my time and others at our community to get happening. And it really only looked at about 18 months worth of client data and only a few hundred clients. But hopefully you can see through what I showed you today that there's quite a lot of power in just that 20 days worth of effort. It wasn't an intensive evaluation. We didn't by any means dig into why it is that the numbers for men and women might be different. As I mentioned, it could be that women and men interpret the questions differently, or potentially, don't see as marked a shift in such a short period of time in terms of how counselling may or may not affect their lives. So that, it needs to work hand in hand. The sort of data science and data crunching needs to work with subject matter expertise and evaluators in that sense. But it really can be quite powerful. I believe as a result, Task Force is looking at bringing more diversity expertise into their program design. So it can really trigger action, and that's what we're really interested in.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Sarah.